officially broken the 10 episode mark. We're not doing any more stories. So welcome to Mayhem Performance Podcast, episode 11.
Where we actually have to find something to talk about outside of our story.
Our guest today, guest speaker is, she doesn't even know it, newly 17-year-old Miley Wade.
Let's talk about let's actually go into what we're thinking we're going to be doing.
Yeah. We're not telling Miley's story, by the
way. Yeah. We did a bunch of research coming into this. Yeah. So shout out Josh Gunkler on the Mayhem media team. Gave us the idea moving forward with the podcast to give a look behind the curtain with some of the athletes that we work with, remotely or on site, and talk about their training.
Yeah.
And what we do with their training, really just coaching them in general, training, nutrition, things that we've practiced with them over the last year or two, whatever, some of the successes, the highs and lows, all that jazz, and then give you guys a little bit of again, like a peek behind the scenes on what we're doing with them, and then what our thought process is, and hopefully you guys can learn from that. So again, I think the big purpose behind these podcasts were to get to know us as coaches, like tell our story, and then man, I know Dom's with me on this, is like, I just love to teach.
Yeah.
So
you can't educate unless someone knows who you are, too.
There we go.
No one wants to listen to somebody who hasn't told you who they are.
Amen. So now that we know everything about us, let's talk about our athletes.
Step one of teaching relational leadership over positional authority.
So, amen. All right.
That's apostolic.
So the jumping in with the conversation we're going to do another toolkit video after this and dive into strength training in general. And there's so many layers you can get into with that, and we kind of usually fly by the seat of our pants, but we thought a good athlete or a good topic to jump into would be what do you do with an athlete who the way Dom pitched it has all the aerobic capabilities and capacity in the world, or the aerobic capabilities of making the CrossFit Games. They're just not strong enough to get there. And then how do you train them in a way that brings up the strength gains without detraining aerobic, which is the age-old problem, and then also make sure that they're focused on long-term development in the sport and you don't rush anything.
Yeah.
So
I feel like it's a good place to start, too, because I think more often than not, whether an athlete is trying to make the games or make a semifinal or just make some sort of higher-level competition for themselves, more often than not, the limiter is like high volume of a skill in workouts or high loads in workouts. Yeah. It's usually not as much aerobic. Now, on the opposite end, that definitely does exist. Like I actually, on the higher level end of things, I coach more athletes that need more fitness than do strength, but they're actually the rare client.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same for you.
I would say it's probably 75% plus.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe even 80.
Yeah.
Right?
And even like I can even think of myself when I first started CrossFit. I'd be the opposite athlete now, but when I first came into CrossFit, I had all the aerobic and like body weight stuff necessary. I had to develop gymnastics skills because I had zero gymnastics background, and I could snatch maybe 175 and clean and jerk like 225 maybe.
Yeah, so. I was the same way. I had some, even with a football background, I seemed to be naturally more enduring. Like you put me in a 15, 20-minute AMRAP, and you talk old regional scores. Like I'm cracking the top 100 in like a 20-minute workout, which pretty good for me back in the day. But strength-wise, like
so behind.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Like I always say, like my back squat, I could throw out some numbers. I could deadlift 520, I could bench 350, but I could only back squat 385.
Yeah.
And then, so anytime you put in like a heavy clean, I think about the one year in the Open where you had the clean total bar ladder, the ascending loads on the cleans.
Yeah.
It just didn't even matter for me. Yeah. Like it was game over. And so, yeah, I mean, that is a common story that we see with most of the athletes we coach. And again, if I had to put a number on it, it would be at least 75%, if not even more.
Yeah, and so much of it, we'll get into this using Miley specifically too, is like if she gets into a workout like that with a high heart rate and a heavy barbell, now it's like even twice as hard.
Yeah,
even though she's aerobic, it doesn't really matter because her heart rate's still going to spike anyways, doing chest to bar snatch or double under clean or whatever it might be.
And the challenge is, and this is a good segue, is the challenge is with those athletes, myself included, and then you too, is like, why? Okay, so then you could go back and be like, all right, Jake, why didn't you squat more?
Right.
Well, because it's not that fun.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Yeah,
not
and-
just because I wasn't good at it, but the strength itself, like, and then what it would have required for me to take that 385 to a 435 or 450 back squat would have been setting aside, you know, some fitness, like to use a really
And
simplistic term. Yeah. And quote unquote fun in order to get really strong. And I hate it because you kick yourself now and you're like, it's hard not to regret that.
Yeah.
Even in football, I couldn't do it.
And I do think about it two ways. Like, I think about where an athlete's at in their life.
Yeah.
And when I have a Miley who is literally just turned 17 years old, like less than a month ago, versus like maybe a 35-year-old female or a 28-year-old female.
Yeah.
Who is strong-ish, maybe not quite enough, but close, but has all the aerobic capabilities and all the gymnastics capabilities. Like, do I kind of roll the dice in competitions and hope maybe not as much strength comes up, try to get her strong enough, like to move moderate heavy loads in a workout, but just take the hit on the strength because of the sacrifice necessary for someone that's 28 years old to make that strength gain she would need to do might not be worth it for her. But if we use Miley, which is going to be a great example, we can really lay out like, A, what you need to stop doing, B, how long it might take, and then C, what it even would look like for her who's going to make the teenage games, like how we're going to use that and also put it into a maintenance phase and get her really fit for a few months.
And then appropriate context, Subin, and you kind of alluded to it, would be we're assuming these people want to maximize their potential in the sport. Like during this conversation, when we talk about setting aside quote unquote fun, sexy workouts, metcons, et cetera, losing a little bit of the fitness and aerobic capacity. Again, we're assuming, hey, you want to maximize your potential. Yeah. Otherwise, like if you just want to throw down in local competitions and, you know, like just have fun with your friends, like it's a little bit of a different conversation
100%.
Because a lot of people at that point are almost arguably strong enough. Yeah. And it may need to go the other end. Yeah. So,
and one thing I know, like before we even get into the weeds, when it comes to an athlete trying to get stronger, I know for myself, and I even saw this with like some of the guys as well, like James is kind of in my head a little bit, but you almost have to let go of body image too, because there is going to be a time where you might need to gain weight. Yeah. And gaining weight might be the only way to get strong.
Plug for the Mayhem Performance Camp where Connor and Mike are going to talk about how an unhealthy relationship with food can really hinder your performance. So,
and it was massive. Like I can literally think of myself. I was about $180 coming into CrossFit, and my numbers swung in a year of strength training and also getting to 205. Now, I didn't love the way I looked at 205, gaining that much weight in a year, but I was trying to do it faster. Yeah. Right. And I can use Nate as an example for that too. My dude put on literally 35 pounds in one off season and his abs were gone. They came back by semifinals, but he was still even like a little higher body fat percentage than he was when he was a teenager. But I was like, do you want an 8-pack or do you want to qualify for the CrossFit Games? Because those might not correlate. Now, most often they do, but they don't always.
For sure.
Right. And like maximum fitness, maximum strength does not always correlate with 8% body fat.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a whole topic in
whole separate thing. But I just kind of want to lay that framework because it is a necessity. If we're going to talk with you guys about strength training programming, if you're not doing what it takes on the back end of things to actually get strong or put on weight to get strong, the programming ain't going to work. Yeah. Even if it's perfect. Yeah. It might work a little bit, but it ain't going to work that much.
That's the definition of robbing Peter to pay Paul, as I like to overkill that phrase. Segue into Miley. Talk about, who Miley is, how long you've been working with her, and let's dive into where she was when y'all started, and then, we'll start there.
So I started with Miley a little over...
Miley Wade.
Yeah, Miley Wade, a little over a year ago.
How old is Miley?
She just turned 17. I started with her end of last September. We worked together for the whole year. She competed in the 16 to 17 games this year, finished 4th. And when I first started with her, like right off the bat, she reminded me a lot of Emma, really. I was just like, there's good movement patterns here, and there's some like higher ends of strength, like kind of how your back squat deadlift was way off. and the upper body was extremely lacking.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was the first thing I noticed. And I even think like injury wise on that, well, if your upper body is behind your lower body and you can pull and squat more than you can stabilize overhead, then you get elbow injuries in a snatch.
What was she doing before she started with you? Just
I believe she was following compete
Yeah.
like with her sister who made the games a couple times.
And then
her sister's like opposite body type of her.
Yeah.
Her sister's just like builds muscle fast, gets strong fast.
What were some of her numbers? Do you remember? Off the top of your
Yeah,
head?
so I know snatch was like she had PR'd at the games, I believe, at 155, and maybe 160, but I would say 155, and then like clean and jerk like 205 ish area, and like with what I know some current numbers now. Like today, she just deadlifted 300 pounds for the first time.
Where was she at?
And
You think
270.
roughly? Okay. What about her snatch and clean now?
Clean and jerk is now at 225. Jerk,
Nice.
I believe, 235, and she has snatched 175.
20 pounds.
So, yeah, 20
Yeah.
pound,
20 pounds on both lifts, pretty much.
That's like a
Yeah.
mix of semi-decent programming and a lot of puberty.
Yeah. We'll take.
Shh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get if you're 32 years old, figure out how to get back into puberty.
Work with Dom for 9 months, guaranteed 20 pounds on all your lifts. Yeah.
if you're in the middle of puberty.
Yeah. I'll only take you on if you're.
No, but like again, the
between the
reason I
ages.
laid out the foundation was because what Miley does an incredible job of is she is eating to get strong
Yeah.
as well. And like she knows when she's not eating enough, and she'll admit it. She'll be like, "I've been kind of slacking."
So let's circle back to that. Like, because I remember her parents, and I forget their names. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm blanking too.
I
I call them Mr. and Mrs. Wade,
but they even asked early on, like they were out in Cookeville one day, and they asked me like, "Hey, is this like normal?" Because I was like, what do you mean? They're like, Miley's not really doing a bunch of CrossFit like conditioning, like in CrossFit. Like, is it okay? And I was just like, just trust Dom. Like Dom knows what he's doing. Just trust Dom. Like she'll be ready when it's time to be ready. And obviously they're completely bought in now.
Yeah.
Because they've seen her progress. But talk about like what you did early on that
Sure.
even like caused Miley and maybe your parents to be like, like, is this okay? Like,
Yeah. So the minute I started working with her too, and it was like shortly before Wadapalooza qualifiers because she was doing that, and she like did them and smashed them because most of them were aerobic. But even in that, there was the snatch complex that year, and it was a much lower finish for her than would be ideal. And so literally after that, I was like, I kind of talked with her and I was just like, hey, do you want to be ready for the games or you want to win Wadapalooza? Like, which one do you want to do? And she was like, well, I'd rather be more prepared for the games because I need to make it as a 16, 17-year-old. And honestly, I think one of the hardest things any athlete can do in the younger range is make the jump the next year from the 14, 15 to the 16, 17, because the 17-year-old girls who are about to turn 18 are women now. And a 15-year-old girl who's like turned 16 before the games is just so far behind.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you have to
being
be
a former teacher and seeing like those girls, like, it's like a world of
like, to be 100% honest, the difference between Lucy and Reese and Miley, like body type wise, is like two different universes right now.
Yeah.
Right. Which won't always be that way as she continues to get older. But I was like, we need to set a foundation now. And your aerobic system is so high. Like it is literally almost individual elite level high. And I could see that just based on where she was compared to like Nina and Jess.
Yeah.
Right. It's like she's 10 times fitter than them. If they run a 5K right now, she's going to beat them by 4 minutes. And so, not that they're the greatest runners in the world, but that's a significant margin.
Between those two options, she chose the games. Like,
ready
for the
games.
games. Yeah.
And so I was like, all right, well, like, just be ready to go into Wadapalooza. Like, can I do burpees without pain? And she was like, okay, let's try. And so that's when we started doing just like, she was still doing 2 sessions a day because she can, but her first session had 0 conditioning in it.
Yeah. What did it walk? Yeah. Give us some specifics. Like, what did you start doing with her?
We originally went into a ton of Oli Tech for her snatch. She has a massive hitch in her snatch, which we're still trying to work on.
Yeah.
But it is infinitely better. And that actually took me, I would say, all the way through the games to help her build confidence to stop hitching.
Quick side excursion. We got to be careful with too many of these, but why do females hitch so much in their Oli lifts? You've been coaching Olympic lifting.
I got a little spoiled with Jess and Nina.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to teach them anything.
Yeah, but like, why do you think that is?
We do see that a lot. I don't know. I
mean, I've seen dudes do it too, but it is more prominent in females.
My guess is this is a pure guess. I literally have not done any research on it, but my thought, and this is why I think Nina and Jess had it, is their posterior is more developed in the position. And I don't think Miley could keep her butt down when the weight would get heavy. And so the only thing she could do, because her knees were completely extended by the time it was at the hip, would be to re-bend her knee and bang it off her hip to get any height on the bar. And I think that's a lack of development in the posterior chain of the first pull of the snatch. But that is way weeds and could be completely untrue.
Yeah.
But
That's
based on like
I bet Sage
few girls I've seen that have had that issue,
yeah,
that's what it looks like to me. And with Miley specifically, I started to develop her posterior chain and it started to go away.
Nice.
While working on just like positional work at very light loads.
Yeah.
And getting her confident just sweeping through the hip instead of needing that massive like hip extension. So anyways, Olympic technique, a lot, very long, pretty much through the whole year in some sense, specifically for the snatcher. Clean technique actually didn't really, for some reason, she didn't really have a hitch on the clean. And her jerk was actually already one of her better lifts, like just confident getting under the bar.
Typically, if people have both issues, I'll start with the snatch too.
Yeah.
Because it's going to carry over.
100%.
You know, to the clean. It's like if you can fix the snatch, the clean comes pretty easy.
Yep. And then, like I said, posterior chain was a weakness. So we did 2 days a week of posterior chain, 1 day a week of squatting, and then 2 days a week of upper press, really.
How much conditioning in there then? Like, would you mix in? Like, where like specifically, how much would you put in?
So I would say up through, let's say I started that in October with her last year. I would say through December, she did no conditioning really in session 1. The only type of conditioning that I would give her in a session 1 would be on her upper body days. We would do some gymnastics training, specifically like for the muscle up or for handstand push-ups, more because I was trying to develop that as well, and I could do that on the upper body day.
Even conditioning or more muscle?
More muscle endurance, more, or even like just like low fatigued, low rep sets.
Yeah.
Like a lot like you like to do with the IGT
low rep
stuff.
high set.
Yeah. Just because that's what she could handle at the time.
And then PMs, what do those look like?
And then PM would be like, usually I would mix like some accessory and I would do some like monostructural maintenance work with her there. So we would do some interval there. And then what I did for her, just to kind of allow her to still have some fun, and because I kind of do this with everybody, is like 1 day a week we still did like one CrossFit workout. So I would like throw that in there
on the monostructural work. What did the intensity look like, and then what were the
so it started with zone 2 stuff for a couple months. Then because
just strictly zone 2, so she was probably truly freaking out. Yeah.
We did 2 months of that. I wish I could have done it longer, but I also knew like she could do well at Wodapalooza and probably podium, just because I know what type of events come out there too, and they're usually a little more aerobic bias. So like come December, I backed off that a little bit, and then we started to build out. Like it's funny, we did the 1250s. I did that with her on like a rower, and then we did a little bit of echo bike work because we always see that at Wodapalooza. So I did that for December and January. And then from there, then I started to add in, like leading into the open a little bit, I added 1 extra day where like in a session 1, we would do some mat interval work. And that I did because I wanted to start moving some moderate barbells in a workout because that was also hard for her.
Yeah.
And I noticed that from Wodapalooza.
What would you say to play devil's advocate, the critic who might come in and go, well, hey, she's so young. Could she have, who's to say she couldn't have gotten just as strong and you could have given her more conditioning work and she would have gotten better at both? What would you say to that person?
Yeah. The main thing I would say is like with her, she kind of had already done that. So the year before that, that's how she trained, and her strength numbers were stagnant.
Yeah.
They were so like the same.
Like not even like no.
Yeah, like her PR snatch at the games was like 5 pounds, I believe she said, and I think her clean and jerk was kind of about the same, but she wasn't making like the jumps the Lucy's and the Reese's of the world were making. Right. And she was like, how do I get like that? And I was like, well, you got to stop running.
And you had mentioned before too, before we started recording, that she was doing the kind of the classic, we'll call it's kind of a classic Mayhem in-season approach, but more maybe year-round.
Right.
Where she's doing her conditioning and then jumping into her
Metcon first, then maybe do some strength, Metcon again, and then come back to session 2 and Metcon again. Right. Which is typical. And then like if she was like, oh, I need to get stronger, she would just like add more strength.
It's odd to me that though, like she stagnated that young, right? Like that she, you know, because typically you'll see young people can almost get away with it.
Sure. And some of her basic lifts were still going up, if that makes sense. So like her power lifts, like back squat, like those things were still increasing for sure, just being younger. What was happening though is
it was the Oli lifts out, and
the
like
Oli lifts were stuck because there was no technical
now
work
I got to
either.
jump in and so man, we've kind of already said it. I've been working on a mentorship program for coaches, and I've probably read it's like 24 hours on concurrent training. And just like the reading is really how to teach it more. You get into the research. It's a bunch of weeds. We got to have a long conversation about it. But
give the people what they want.
What's so interesting in the research with concurrent training, simply defined and not use too much jargon, is there's a lot of definitions. But the way I would define it is, how do you balance multiple energy systems at the same time? So how do you balance, to keep it even more simple, strength with aerobic? That's what most of the research looks at. We have to balance strength, aerobic, muscular endurance, and even other training demands like skill development, et cetera, which is not an energy system. Anyway, the research, there's a lot of principles that you can draw from it. I actually don't even call them principles. I would call them considerations, because like there's very few hard truths like that you can pull out from them. But the one recurring theme that you see in all the research that's been done on it for almost 50 years now is the number one thing that's impacted when you try to combine strength and aerobic training is speed, right? Like speed, it would seem to go like, okay, you do both at the same time. In terms of like what's impacted the most, you would see it would be speed, strength, and then hypertrophy or muscle growth would be like last. There doesn't seem to be a ton of impact on muscle growth. Like that's kind of mixed research there. But one thing that's been conclusive is like velocity and speed on the bar get shot when you add too much aerobic volume to your training.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's different mechanisms to that fatigue.
Unless you're Guy, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, true. Then he can do whatever. So that makes sense even for her. It's funny, like that's a great case study of going, hey, her powerlifting's still going up, but speed on the bar. Why? Because what do you need speed? It's neurological.
100%.
Right? And if you're fatigued going into speed work, which is what Olympic lifting is, it's strength speed.
Right. And you're
not going to be able to move the bar fast.
You could even see some of that on her top end ability to like crank a machine too.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, that's something I do with her now, like currently right now, as a bit of her conditioning.
Yeah. One of the studies I read was on plyometrics. They were looking at, vertical jump and how it's just like, I forget the exact percentages of how much it went down when they put in an aerobic session right before doing vertical jump work. But it literally it's creating central peripheral, like in the muscle itself, but also central fatigue. Your brain's getting tired and it's not going to move the bar fast.
Sure.
So that's interesting.
Makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense.
Little nerdy deep dive for a sec. So,
So again, that was like kind of through Wadapalooza, but then by the way, actually
back up even more, which is what's smart with you, is going, hey, as I'm working on her power lifts and her absolute strength development, all of her Olympic lifting, I mean, what's the heaviest percentage you guys were doing that entire time?
Oh, leading into Wadapalooza was actually like light.
Yeah.
Like I would say like nothing over 70%.
And did you still see?
And I let her take a couple touches before, because I was like, I have a feeling
couple shots.
Like here in like every 4-ish weeks, I would be like, hey, let's just do like a moderate heavy single today and just see where you're at. And actually, when we got to Wadapalooza, there was a complex, and she hit 5 pounds over what she hit at the games for the complex.
Nice.
So we were already above
with rarely
3
touching.
months.
Yeah, like probably 3 touches on anything over 80%. Yeah, that's awesome.
I think she had only hit what she had hit at the games in training.
And you could potentially argue the reason she's doing that, yes, it's because she's getting stronger, like absolute strength is going up, but maybe even she's just less tired.
Feels better, 100%.
Right? Yeah, so she can,
literally
again,
100%.
Speed goes up on the bar. So,
And then, so again, just to keep us moving forward, from Wadapalooza on is when we actually like got the dates and stuff for her season. And when I saw that her games were at the end of August, I was like, okay, this is new because her semifinal, I believe, was in May. Does that sound right? Maybe even before that, actually.
I think it was before that. April was age group.
April. So we had May, June, and July, and basically the month of August, which is typical like off-season time for athletes who don't make the games. So I was like, okay, I have 4-month period. And I was like, I literally grabbed her and I was like, we're going to do a 3-month off season. And then we're going to do a month of games prep. And what I did is I used that Juggernaut program because of her NME, just based on that. And I was like, I know this will work.
Oh, man, you can't just drop NME.
And we did. Well, we've talked about it before. We've talked about,
Okay,
plenty of times. If you guys don't know what NME is by now.
Episode
2. No.
Yeah.
We've definitely talked about
neuromuscular efficiency. Google it. Yeah.
So I just took that into consideration, and I did that for her back squat, her deadlift, and her strict press. And then I just built out like 12-week Oli progression with a deload every fourth, and then built out a big ring muscle up progression for her. And it was actually a strength ring muscle up progression because there was a dip weakness, so we did a ton of bench pressing.
I'll say that is ballsier than I would have ever even done.
And I was like, so she literally did no conditioning.
Like 4 months before the CrossFit Games, you do a 3-month strength program.
Yeah. And then at the end of the 3rd month in second sessions, I started doing like game style training.
Yeah.
In second sessions. And then the 4th month, I literally just switched her into maintenance on strength, started to actually taper the strength down, and started just blasting her with CrossFit. Like sport-specific CrossFit. And she showed up to the games on fire.
I was there. Remember?
She would have podiumed if we didn't screw up the handstand walk, sled push. And she, in that field with the girls that I know were in there, she really shouldn't have had the business podiuming with how much stronger the other girls are. She's just a freak competitor.
In hindsight, would you have changed anything? You're like, that's exactly what she
No, I literally, like the minute we finished, I was like, we're doing the same exact thing this year. And when she finished the games, I was like, are you ready to go right back into what you did leading into the games? And she was like, yeah. And we've been strength training like crazy, and she's been hitting.
What have you been doing for, like did you literally go back and repeat the same Juggernaut cycle?
Yes. Yeah. So we started with that, but before I jumped into that, I did do a 6-week hypertrophy with her. And that was more so like I wanted to deload her CNS after the games. I actually wanted to jack up her upper body a little bit, which worked a little bit. I don't think we were eating quite enough to get the muscle growth that I wanted in her upper body, which is I just got to work with her on her nutrition a little bit more.
That's the Zadazorski in you, which the hypertrophy
phase. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and look, I probably wouldn't do that with as much with other athletes, but with someone who's young enough to really pack on muscle, it's worth my time right now, because if I can get her jacked now, it's going to play off better, and it gives her an edge because she does have a little bit of like sometimes she'll get in comps. Like she's going to compete in RX Wadapalooza. She made RX instead of teen as a 17-year-old, and like sometimes she'll get in there and she'll be like, why does my arm look like a spaghetti noodle? And I'll be like, well, it kind of does.
We got to do curls. To go back, I think that's to not skip over it, just such a big takeaway for people listening. When you finish a strength program and it worked really well, I'll never forget. I never forget, like 6 years ago, sitting with Sean McGovern, one of our coaches, and we were doing like a mentorship call. And I had this strength program that I don't remember who it was. One of my athletes just crushed it, and we get done. And I just remember being excited to talk to Sean about like the what's next, like help come up with the next plan. I'm like, yeah, dude. So like, here's like they crush it, yada. What do you think we should do? And he was like, what do you mean? Run it again. And I'm like, seriously? And he was like, yeah, run it again. I thought it was like the miracle coach. Again. That's kind of like Sean when it comes to if it worked, do it again. Do it again. Depending where you're on in the season. Yeah. So I love that you went right back to it.
Yeah. And then now like.
And that's a CrossFitter in us.
Just because she has gotten significantly stronger. I'm doing more concurrent now than I was last year because she's kind of earned it. Mm-hmm. And I do think, again, depending on what happens with her season, if she were to make an indie, like if she was to make Syndicate or something, I would let her do it for sure. And I would probably kind of like taper her really for it to let her give a good shot with the bigger girls. But I'm going to have a similar approach leading into the games again, because if we can keep and this was the main point I wanted to bring up, is like, obviously she wants to compete. She wants to win other games. But if I have someone that isn't making the teenage games yet and is maybe a year off, I might even tell them like, hey, you can still do the open, you can still do the semifinals, but I'm not going to taper you for that, nor am I going to aerobically prep you for that, but you're going to do an entire year of off-season type work. That is the sacrifice most people do not want to make because they are so scared of losing fitness, and they're so scared of not being fit during their open and their friends seeing their scores that they cannot let it go. And so they're not willing to. You do have to lose fitness to get strong. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Like no one's gonna lie about that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I wouldn't disagree. I think that there are so many, like, people will bring up the anecdotes, you know, and this is where I would respond with another Seanism, like, outliers don't count.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we cannot use exceptions to the rule. What is it, the whole phrase, like, to provide the rule? I forget how you say that, but, like, that you can't pull the anecdote. You can't pull Rich out and be like, but Rich did conditioning before his strength work. It's like,
Yeah.
Rich will be the first to tell you. Oh, that's what I love about Rich's humility. Like, I'm a genetic freak. I busted my butt. I worked really hard, but Rich will tell you, you've heard him say it 100 times, don't use what I did as the rule. Like,
Yeah.
There's some stuff he did that was very principle based that he would say, yeah, this is a rule you should follow, but don't just do it because I did it, you know? And he is the exception to the rule with a lot of that. Right. So,
and that's something like Miley did a great job of this year is like she knew going into the Wadapalooza qualifiers that she was not nearly as fit as she was at the games, at least, like feeling wise. And there was a couple workouts where she was hurting and she was like, I'm kind of not used to feeling like that. But she was like, I'm not worried. I'll qualify for what I want to qualify for. I'll just push myself harder.
I think I've gotten over the years discouraged working with athletes like who are like, I come to me and they're like, I want to go to the CrossFit Games someday, or I want to go to a semifinal or whatever it might be. They want to get to a high level in the sport. And they have these massive strength holes where you're like, man, you're 50 plus pounds off every lift. Yeah. And it's almost like no matter how much, and I have a lot of empathy because I didn't do it right for them, but no matter how much you beat into their head early on, like you got a long road ahead, you got a long road ahead, you got a long road ahead. I've seen very few stick it out.
Yeah.
So what are those,
especially for strength stuff?
What do those conversations look like when you take on a new client that has the 50 plus pound deficits? Like, how do you communicate it to them in a way that?
I've actually been using something you said at the last performance camp. So plug the performance camp.
Let's go again. This
like
Friday,
where you were like, your goals and your priorities have to align.
Yeah.
And I started talking to people more about like, okay, you say you want to do this goal. Well, this is what you're going to have to prioritize in order to meet that goal. Do you still want the same goal? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to change the goal so that that's not the priority?
Yeah.
Because if that's really your goal, then this has to be your priority in your training, outside of the gym, in your relationships, and everything you're doing, how much time you're spending on your phone, whatever. Like, if this is your goal, these priorities have to match that for the next 2 years.
And I've said it before on a podcast, but this is unpopular. If your priority is solely having fun in training, you need to change your goal.
Yeah.
Right? Because fun is subjective, first of all. And if you find doing a bunch of Metcons and smashing your head against the wall to be fun and you want to prioritize that, but your goal is to go to the CrossFit Games and you are a male who deadlifts 375 and benches 200 pounds and snatches, I'm making crap up, 185. It's like, dude.
And here's why.
Sorry,
and I talk about it to people all the time is like, the reason that's not going to work is because you have like idiots like me signing up for the open and I don't barely work out anymore. And I'll probably get dead last on the burpee pull up shuttle run thing, but I'm about to come squat, clean, thruster 255.
Let's go.
Without training. Right? Like,
that's just what power clean.
That's just what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can't even get past the guy who works out 4 times a year. Like, right. It's a little more than that now, but
it really does come down to a goal and priority conversation. And most of the people I end up working with, it ends up being a shift in their goal.
Yeah. Which is fine.
Which
or like I've also had people don't make the massive shift in priority. Like, that's probably one of the things I was most proud of coaching Nate last year. Is he was like, okay, this is what I said I wanted to do. I'm going to freaking do it. I don't care what I look like. I don't care what happens. I don't care if people be like, you'll never be fit enough. Dude, people were on that guy's butt around the open when he was dying in every open workout because he was still 205, 210 pounds. And we literally hadn't done a CrossFit workout in 7 months.
Yeah. Well, how much did James Sprague? Like,
same idea. He had a little less of a strength deficit than Nate, honestly, believe it or not. Like, Nate had a massive strength deficit, but Nate literally went from, he just sent me a video the other day, and he's been taking some time off, and he's going to start training again. But he just power cleaned 370, and he hasn't lifted. Like, he hasn't been following any progression in 2 months.
It's a lot of times, when people are like, man, a 2-year plan, that's forever. It's like, don't you have more empathy for the Olympians now?
Yeah.
4 years.
4 years, yeah.
Yeah.
But like Nate committed to that for an entire year.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he was willing to know that like I will not feel the way I felt at 185 pounds cranking through ring muscle ups.
Yeah. And you're talking about a year though. Most people need more than
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he like he had some numbers that were there. Like the numbers were there, just like if he wanted to make the games, they needed to exponentially grow. And again, I'm talking about someone who was 19, 20 years old who's still growing. So, but again,
moral of the story. Yeah. What would you say? Biggest takeaway then, if you're somebody who wants to go to the CrossFit Games, you want to make it to a semifinal, whatever, like a higher elite level in the sport.
Yeah. Even if it's like an RX or an elite Wodapalooza, you have to be strong to make those things.
Yeah.
Like
what would
coming up.
Sum it up. What would be the biggest takeaway if you've got these big strength deficits and that is your goal and you're willing to make like the sacrifices and align your priorities with that goal? What would you say to that athlete? What do they need to be doing?
This is going to sound crazy simple, but do less metcons, less conditioning. Don't be afraid to do aerobic maintenance with lower intensity as well. So I would kind of mix that all into one. Number 2, make your strength training your priority. So it's the first thing you do every day. It comes before all of your aerobic training. Doesn't have to come before all skill training, but definitely before anything aerobic wise, and maybe even depending on who you are. And this was Nate and this was Miley, having days where you do no conditioning at all. And you do single sessions because yes, sometimes single sessions, you get stronger when you recover more. And it's fact.
And the research backs it. There's based on now 50 years of studies done on concurrent training, there's like a 6-hour minimum for neuromuscular fatigue minimum to go away after an intense aerobic session.
Dude.
6 hours. And most of the research will come out and say in their conclusions, we recommend minimum 6 hours, ideally 24, but you know what, if you can, 48 hours if you're trying to get really strong. Which backs what you just said.
And then I would say the third thing on that, like 3 points. So chill on your conditioning, prioritize strength in your programming above everything else, so much so that maybe you don't even condition for either a period of time, which is what I did with Nate. It was actually 3 months, no conditioning at all. For Miley, it was just like maintenance a few days a week with no conditioning. And then the third thing is your nutrition and your sleep and your life outside of the gym has to match the in-gym work.
Yeah.
So if you're not eating enough to gain weight, if that's what needs to happen for you to get stronger, then you're prioritizing your strength and minimizing your conditioning isn't going to even work.
Somebody remind me, it just popped in my head. Good toolkit video would be, how do you structure that conditioning? I don't know the right way of putting it is like, what are some ideas of still doing conditioning that still allows you to get strong? Yeah. Right. Like
it's like reverse of what we do when we do strength maintenance and then we up conditioning for the games or whatever.
Yeah. It'd be cool to talk about like, what are some of the strategites, techniques that we use
maintain aerobic fitness,
to maintain it, or maintain just all the modalities.
And also press strength up.
Yes. Yeah. That'd be fun.
Yeah. That is a good idea.
Next time somebody email me and remind me. Yeah. Gunkler, don't forget. We'll wrap it there.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Shout out to Miley Wade, future insane CrossFit athlete, and also for being extremely coachable. Probably definitely one of my favorite. She's a cool athlete too, because I do mostly remote with her, but she'll pop down here like once or twice a week and I get some in person with her, but she does a good job of kind of doing whatever she's told. So for the most part, sometimes she gives me a little country sass, but
Miley Wade, future CrossFit Games champ.
Miley Wade.
No pressure.
Really how it's said.
That's all.
Episode 11 out.
Wrapped.